So I know a lot of you are tired of the community's collective habit of doom posting a character before they release. People love to say stuff like Black Swan is only 10% better than Sampo, Ling Sha is just worse than Gallagher, Inoxa sucks, and so on. We've all heard it before, and very rarely do these characters live up to their preconceived negative expectations. That all said, why would Cyrene be any different? History would suggest that much like any new unit, she would release and prove the doubters wrong. So why do I still think Cyrene is an exception to this pattern? Well, it's time to take a closer look. I want to preface this by saying that we're not going to analyze Cyrene's raw numbers, as those are very subject to change. The problem more so lies within the concept of her kit, and the fact that such a kit will likely fail no matter how it is executed. To give a very brief summary, Cyrene's purpose as a unit is as a dedicated support to specifically Chrysos hairs. Along with some generalist buffs, Cyrene gives a very specific buff depending on the selected Chrysos hair. In other words, Cyrene is a character who has a portion of her power budget retroactively buffing old units, as when we transition to version 4, we will have moved on to a new planet with different characters and no more new Chrysos hairs. In a game where power creep is fast and rampant, this is bad news. Ideally, you want a support character to scale well into the future with the ability to synergize with future units. This is something that Cyrene is automatically gated from, unless they somehow release more Chrysos hair units, which again seems unlikely. Now, there is actually an older character that received a similar treatment to Cyrene, albeit less blatant. That character is Fugue. She was released at the end of version 2 to buff previous version 2 DPSs, similar to how Cyrene is being added at the end of version 3 to buff previous version 3 DPSs. What Fugue essentially did was make some of the strongest units in the game even stronger, a seemingly unnecessarily overpowered addition that these DPSs didn't need at the time. However, it didn't take long for Fugue and the rest of the Super Break archetype to fall considerably in relevance even early into version 3. The reason? Fugue had an inability to support any unit that came after her, meaning that she would inevitably succumb to power creep sooner or later. While this isn't directly ingrained into her kit like Cyrene's, it was more so due to Hoyoverse's refusal to further supplement the break archetype. The result still tells us what happens when a support unit doesn't scale one way or the other. Fortunately, the good news is that Fugue can easily obtain relevance again if Hoyoverse decides to add new break supports or DPSs to complement her, as it's not like she's a weak unit. She just has no one strong to utilize her. Cyrene, on the other hand, does not have that luxury. Once Amphoris's story ends, the Chrysos hair cast also ends. It would be hopefully naive to think that the current selection of Chrysos hairs won't be power crept going into version 4. This is just the reality of Honkai Star Rail in its current state. What's more likely for the future of Cyrene and the hairs is that they will fall from relevance, with Cyrene being the only thing keeping them afloat, similar to how Fugue is necessary to keep the break archetype playable as of today. Depending on how they execute her kit, Cyrene may be the only way for Chrysos hairs to maintain viability going into the future, which is a pretty bad way to approach it. Hoyoverse likely plans to raise the damage ceiling of the game using Cyrene, and then raise that damage ceiling once more when the fancy new version 4 units drop, with the only way for version 3 units to keep up is by having Cyrene on the team. This is purely just speculation for me, but I really wouldn't put it past Hoyo to do something like that, as it's kind of what they did with Fugue. Now, I did mention that Cyrene does have some journalist buffs in her kit. Even with part of her power budget being extremely specific, perhaps not all hope is lost when it comes to the possibility of her having a scalable kit. I would love to eat my words and be proved wrong, as she is one of my favorite Hoyo characters ever made, but based on how her kit is currently designed, this also seems somewhat unlikely. You see, not only are Chrysos hairs reliant on Cyrene, but Cyrene is also reliant on the Chrysos hairs. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but without multiple Chrysos hairs on the team, Cyrene is going to have a very hard time getting her ultimate, as her kit is hard-coded around it. In other words, Cyrene has trouble functioning without a full or at least partial team of other hairs, which puts the nail in the coffin when it comes to her future scalability. Hey guys, this is Cyrene from the future for a small correction. A team of specifically hairs isn't needed to maximize the charge for Cyrene's ultimate. They can also just be a remembrance character, which actually does help her flexibility quite a bit. However, this still relies on Hoyoverse to release future remembrance characters that work with her, and considering that the new region will probably come with new shield mechanics and potentially even a new shield path, I'm still quite doubtful of her future viability once we get deeper into version 4. On the bright side, this is something that can be easily changed. Hoyo definitely has the ability to at least make her less reliant on Chrysos hairs for more generalist purposes, while still keeping her kit concept of being a hair buffer. I seriously hope this is the direction they decide to take, as this can greatly salvage her flawed design. However, this is Star Rail we're talking about, so who knows what decisions they'll make. That all being said, I'm still pulling for her and her sig with my free-to-play salary. Perhaps I shall get some Eidolons too, because I have completely fallen for her. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I am actually really close to 1,000 subscribers, so it would mean a lot to me if you could drop a sub. But that will be it for today. I will see you next time.